what is climate change? Climate change is defined by the United Nations as long-term shifts in temperatures and weather patterns. These shifts may be natural, but since the 1800s, human activities have been the main driver of climate change, primarily due to the burning of fossil fuels like coal, oil, and gas, which produces heat-trapping gases. So what is the greenhouse effect? The greenhouse effect is basically when the atmosphere absorbs infrared radiation rising from Earth's sun warmed surface, and the more greenhouse gas there is, the less radiation that can escape from Earth to space, and the warmer the Earth gets. So what are the effects of climate change? So let's talk about extreme heat. So according to the 2013 IPCC working group reported that the spectrum for heat is anywhere from 0.4 degrees Celsius to 2.6 degrees Celsius, which in Fahrenheit would be from 0.7 degrees to literally 4.7 degrees Fahrenheit, which shows that global warming is going to keep on affecting us in the upcoming years just more and more. What about floods and droughts? Well, in the summer of 2010, Moscow had a hot and unexpected summer where for the first time the temperature was 86 degrees Fahrenheit every day for more than 4 weeks, and there were forest fires that blocked out the buildings and clogged people's lungs. This is where Russian leaders that were long skeptical of global warming expressed a concern for the nation's climatic future. Some places, as you might also hear a lot, that California is going to disappear, that part of Florida is going to disappear. And if you look at different websites and you look at different books, they mention how the south of Florida is going to flood. And part of it is true. Florida's south part is going to basically flood. Not anytime soon, maybe in the upcoming 100 years. Disney is going to be flooded, and cornfields are going to be flooded in Florida. Part of California is going to be flooded. The Bahamas and the Delmarva Peninsula by the Atlantic coast and to the east of the Appalachian Mountains is also in really big danger of completely being flooded. If you look at videos online, several will also say that the Amazon River is going to start growing due to all the sea levels rising. It's just going to fill in the Amazon River even more. Let's talk about storms. Storms are going to become more energetic, and more storms are going to be formed in places where destructive storms were not usually made or seen. And in places where they had more of the heavy storms, they're going to have even heavier storms, causing the water to accumulate more and more. In the book called Global Climate Change by H.W. Wilson also states how global warming has altered ocean and air currents, meaning that average rates of precipitation will change worldwide, giving mid-latitude regions heavy rainfalls and making the equatorial regions increasingly arid. So how will climate change affect agriculture, and how would it affect the economy? So if we touch on agriculture, it's obvious that a disaster is going to equal another disaster. In the book called Global Climate Change by H.W. Wilson, it states that, quote, more severe weather patterns are expected to have significant effects on global food production, with more extensive crop damage like occurring due to drought, flooding, and forest fire. People can't be the only thing causing climate change. Some things like cows play a really big part of why global climate change is happening. Cows. So, what about cows? You might be wondering, why are even cows mentioned here? Cows play a big part of why the climate is changing. Cows actually produce 220 pounds of methane, which is 28 times more potent in warming the atmosphere than carbon dioxide, which, in other words, they fart. They throw out gases into the air, and they're causing more damage onto the earth with their farts. So it's not only people, cows are deadly to the earth. Let's talk about the views of the people politically. In 2019, many people protested against climate change and climate change has been a concern since 1980. Everyone knows that it's there, but it would be hard to adapt to a place where no cars are being used to take you through long distances. Like, just imagine you driving to work with your bike and you have to go through the freeway or something. Like, that's hard to adapt. And the problem is finding alternatives for everything. And that also the government doesn't want to do. It would involve too much money and too many changes. I conducted a survey for my composition class in which they had to respond to a question that said, do you think that there's anything that could be done to save the earth, or do you think that it's too late for any changes? And out of 10 people, 3 out of 10 said that they believe there's still hope for stopping climate change. 5 out of 10 people said that nothing could be done, and 2 out of 10 mentioned how they thought something could be done, but nothing was going to be done because it would take a lot. For example, a person in the survey responded with, quote, we could still, I think, if we stopped using gas-powered objects and immediately switched to solar-powered stuff, but other than that, it seems not as likely to be saved anytime soon. When I conducted the research, I added 3 more questions to it that I thought were very important to talk about. So one of the questions was that if you could do anything to help stop climate change, what would it be and why? Many people mention things like solar-powered objects that don't produce unnecessary pollution, trying to use less gas by driving less and eating less meat, invest in renewable energy, and not put so much fumes in the air because that's our biggest problem. But then I asked another question saying, do you think that climate change is being ignored? 90% of the people said yes, that it's being ignored. And the follow-up question was, how do you think the government feels about climate change? And a lot of people mentioned how they could care less. They said, I don't really know. I would hope that they would care enough to try and prevent climate change from being irreversible. And others just mentioned how I don't think they feel for climate change. All of the responses mentioned how the government just doesn't care. 10 out of 10 people mentioned how the government doesn't care. But yet, if there was something they could do to help stop climate change, they would do it. I mean, most of the responses were that they could do anything to help stop climate change. All of them put alternatives of how they could stop or reduce climate change. But the problem here is that they all believe the government ignores it. The government is a really big problem in this, and I believe they should be taking action. But other than that, what has been done to stop climate change? Well, politically, countries have agreed to inventory their greenhouse emissions and publish yearly summaries. There is also this protocol that is called the Kyoto Protocol, and how this works is basically that developed nations should cut their emissions off by 6 greenhouse gases that include CO2, nitrogen oxides, methane, sulfur hexafluoride, hydrofluorocarbons, and perfluorocarbons. And the US contributed by reducing 7% of all the 6 greenhouse gases. End quote. From a person from my composition class. Maybe nothing can be done but to only look up.